Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to call this meeting of the Town of Wolfeboro. Sorry. Is that better? Can you hear me now? Right. Sorry about that. It's been 40 years since I've been on the radio, so I lost my radio voice. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to call this meeting of the Town of Wolfeboro Zoning Board of Adjustment to order. We've been asked to have the rehearing, the motion for rehearing held first. If there is no objection, I'd like to take that first. Okay, seeing no objection. And for the purpose of the rehearing, I'd like to appoint Suzanne as a member. Would you read the rehearing first, then? We have a, oh, there it is, okay.
What's that?
I'm sorry, I was going to ask Matt if he had a copy.
I don't have the list of abutters and so forth, so all I need to, okay, this is a motion for a rehearing of ZBA case number 01-AAD-18 on Stoneham Road.
Thank you. I'd like to announce initially that Mr. Hodder has asked to be recused from this hearing, and because he's a member of the planning board, the next two hearings. For this hearing, I've asked Suzanne Ryan to join us to be a member of the board. Okay. Sorry.
No.
Oh, we got Hank on it.
Miss Ryan isn't a butter to this
Okay,
case,
so you
though.
can't be on this. I'm sorry. So we got, I'm sorry, we have Hank Y on the phone.
You're gonna have to speak.
Can you hear me, Hank?
Speak louder. I can't hear you all.
Can you hear me now?
That's better.
So our board will consist of you, Hank, Susan Razor, Dara Silk, myself, and Tim Cronin. Tim was on the hearing initially. Sorry about that. No, we're not. We were asked if we could do the motion for rehearing first to get that out of the way. We've all received extensive paperwork from Mr. Nix. Based on some conversations with council, it looks like there are two issues. And Hank, can you still hear us? Hank, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Yes, go ahead.
It looks like there are two issues that have been raised that we have to deal with initially. And I understand Matt has spoken with you about the requirement in RSA 91A to indicate that you cannot be here and the reason why you cannot be here. And if that reason for tonight is different than it was for the last night, if you would please let us know. Thank you, Hank.
Okay, the reason I cannot be there is that I've relocated for the winter down to Nashua, New Hampshire, and that was the reason I was not there at the last hearing, and I cannot be there at this hearing.
Okay.
I'm just out of town.
Okay, and we also had a question as to whether you received the package of the slides that were shown at the first hearing on this. Did you receive them?
I have all the slides.
And did
I have
you?
all the slides that were shown at that hearing, and I have reviewed them all just as we speak, and I'm very familiar with them.
Okay, and do you feel that if you had seen them, you would have a different decision than your vote?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Do you feel that your decision, your vote that you cast, would be different because you've now seen those slides?
Nothing new came up from those slides. I feel the same way as I did before.
Okay. Thank you, Hank. Another question that's come up from Mr. Nix in the rehearing was the involvement of our counsel. And it appears Mr. Nix believes that some of the statements that she made may have been factual rather than purely legal advice Having listened to her statements and her input, I did not feel that the statements she made after the close of the hearing, public hearing, were anything other than giving legal advice or giving an example of how legal advice might be interpreted so that we could understand it better as laymen. Does anyone else feel any differently?
I do not.
Okay, and would any of your votes have changed? Susan?
No, my vote would remain the same.
Sarah?
My vote would still remain the same. I was not in favor.
Okay.
My vote would remain the same also.
And mine would remain the same as well.
My vote remains the same.
Thank you. I think those are the issues that we want to consider unless someone else has some other items to discuss. Having read the paperwork that was submitted, I feel that there's nothing new in there that wasn't available to us at the time of our initial discussion at the last meeting, and therefore I see no reason to go through them point by point. But if anyone has any other issues to raise, please feel free to do so. Sarah?
Yes, since I brought it up at the previous meeting, I have located a document from one of our training sessions from the Office of State Planning regarding the master plan. And this sort of ties into perhaps something that Laura Spector Morgan said, or Morgan Spector, I'm never quite sure. It talks about the master plan is municipality's most basic resource, and it determines the character and quality of life within the community, and it's a protection for unique features. And when she advised us, it was just a recommendation. I would just like to read this paragraph here. It says, a master plan is a planning document that serves to guide the overall character, physical form, and development of a community. It describes how, why, where, and when to build or rebuild a city or town. It provides guidance to local officials making decisions on budgets, ordinances, capital improvements, zoning and subdivision matters, and other development-related issues. While the master plan is not a legal document, it does provide the legal basis for zoning and other land use regulations. And I bring that up because I read at the hearing, and I would just read again the part that we had in the master plan that says very clearly, do not issue building permits for development on Class 6 roads. And I feel strongly that that was one of my main reasons for voting no, and I feel strongly that the board should have listened to that. I don't know if the board was guided by what she said and ignored that which I read from the documents or not.
I think the takeaway from me from what you just read is that it is not a legally binding document, that is just guidance, and it's not a regulation or a law. So that's what I take out of that.
It clearly says it provides the legal basis for zoning and other land use regulations.
Which is not a regulation or law.
No.
I believe the
But it's-
statute says that a town that wishes to adopt zoning ordinances can do that. But in order to do that, they have to adopt a master plan.
Correct.
I think that's what that means. It doesn't, I don't take that to mean, and our council did not take that to mean, that if there's a provision in there that says, and I didn't hear what the actual wording that you said from the master plan. Even if the master plan says, recommends, do not issue building permits, that's not a statute. Doesn't take away from our authority. And it also seems to be somewhat in conflict with the clear statutory permission to a town board of selectmen to adopt a Class 6 road policy.
I don't see that it's in conflict at all.
You
I
don't-
was on the Board of Selectmen when they came up with their policy, and it was not their intent to allow people to develop down what is barely more than a driveway, that is more than the 1,800 feet that is the legal limit for a cul-de-sac on a subdivision. So it's flaunting not only the intent of the master plan, but to my way of thinking, it's flaunting the most extreme length, which is 1,800 feet for a cul-de-sac for a road. And we have information that says that you can't subdivide on a Class 6 highway.
I have a question for Matt. One of the documents that I read said there was no building on Class 6 roads. However, it would be allowed with an exception from the Board of Selectmen. Is that not part of the documentation of the town?
That's correct. And what Sarah is referring to is the Class 6 road policy, which has a specific set of criteria that, as part of the review process with the Board of Selectmen, they decide whether those criteria are met, and they make an exception under that Class 6 road policy to allow for building permits under 674-41.
And the Board of Selectmen did give it okay to Mr. Simmons to build his house there.
That's correct.
Any other discussion? Hank, do you have anything you wish to add or any questions you want to add?
No, I've reviewed that, and it's clear to me that the selectmen have already issued prior permits based on the criteria, and they've advanced beyond the recommendation of the master plan to establish some situations where a permit may be approved for a Class 6. And this is another case, and I believe all the conditions required have been met.
Thank you. Any other comments? Or Paul, I'd like to make a motion that the motion for rehearing in the matter of ZBA case number 01-AAD-18 involving a lot on Stoneham Road be denied.
I'll second that motion.
Okay. I need to make a roll call on here, so Susan, yes, aye or nay?
Aye to your motion to deny.
Sarah?
Nay.
Hank?
I'm sorry,
The motion has been made for deny the motion for rehearing.
I would deny.
Okay, and
Deny.
Tim, deny. Okay, it's 4-1. Thank you very much. Motion for rehearing is denied. Hank, thank you very much for your participation. Hey, Susan, would you read the first item for tonight then?
Yes, I will.
You need to use a microphone.
I'm not an abutter on that case.
That's correct.
And in the prior record, I listed her as a neighbor
Yes.
as opposed to an abutter. The next matter before the ZBA is case number 08-V-18 concerning tax map number 148-12. The applicant is Heidi von Gans Kogian. I mess that up every time, I'm sorry. This is a public hearing for a variance under Article 6, Section 175-44 of the Wolfeboro Planning and Zoning Ordinance to allow for 3 signs, 12 square feet, each mounted in a vertical manner on the property for existing 1810 house bed and breakfast. The property is located at 458 Center Street. A site visit was held at approximately 6:20 prior to this meeting and was attended by all at the table here. Notice of this meeting was provided to the appropriate town offices and to Von Gans Kogian, Albee II, Wolfeboro Masonic Association, Leopold, and Downer.
Thank you. For the purpose of this hearing, I will appoint Suzanne Ryan, alternate, to sit on the board.
Good evening. I'm Heidi von Gertz-Kogan. I live at 458 Center Street in Wolfeboro. I run and own the Winnipesaukee Winery at that location, the 1810 House Bed and Breakfast, and I'm the owner of the barn that includes the antiques barn that it has been operating there for some years. My request tonight for zoning board variance for Article 6, Section 175-44, is to ask that the zoning ordinance be waived to permit the signs to be placed on the property, one for each of the businesses, the 1810 House, the Winnipesaukee Winery, and the Antiques Barn. So in your packet, you should have a rendering of a sign drawing that Jerome Holden made that includes a vertical representation of the three signs. So the sign will be 12 square feet each. Three separate signs, 12 square feet each. Any questions so far? I think you should have that graphic. So I'll continue with the questions for the zoning variance. The variance will not be contrary to the public interest because the businesses along Route 28 Center Street have signs that clearly denote the name and nature of the respective business. People refer to the area of Center Street as the business district. The character of the neighborhood, in my opinion, is not changed by adding an additional sign that's professionally made. I have a sign that has been made by Jerome Holden, and he does very nice work. And I think the colors that we've chosen, the black and the white and the gold, it makes everything appear to be planned out nicely. There are other signs in the business area that are of a similar size. We think our representation looks very nice, and it's important for businesses along that area to have a legible sign that indicates the location and the hours of the business. To give you further information, if you're not aware, the speed limit on that area is 40 miles an hour as you're coming into town, and as you're coming out of town, it goes up to 50 miles an hour on our property line. The spirit of the zoning ordinance is observed because the businesses that are on the property are an allowed use for the property, and the professionally installed signs will indicate the name of the specific businesses and provide that information in an easy-to-read format for the passing motorists. As I mentioned, item number 3, substantial justice is done because as I mentioned, the speed limit along Route 28 changes on the inbound side from 55 to 40, and it's just a little bit over 300 feet of length for our frontage on 28. And it's important that the text is large enough to be legible for the motorists that are actually driving past. Oftentimes, we find that vehicles need some time to turn safely into our entrance. We are concerned about public safety because some of the cars do stop short or slow down very quickly to make the turn into our driveway. It's my information about signs, sizes, and text sizes that with good design elements on the signs, the requested size of 12 square feet will allow the text to be large enough to be legible for the posted speed limit, and this will enhance the safety of the turning motorists in that area. Item number 4, the values of surrounding properties will not be diminished because we do have over 300 feet of frontage on 28. The abutters to the north and south are both commercial establishments. Their properties will not be devalued by the installation of a professionally made sign on our property. The installation of the sign will not block any visual viewpoint to their properties on either the north or the south. And in fact, our sign is set back a little bit off the edge of the road. The requested 3 signs are professionally designed, as I mentioned before. I think they're pleasing to the eye. It matches with the color scheme on the property already as far as the buildings and the shutters go. It's neat, and it will be installed with adequately sized posts and strong enough to manage the wind load in the area. The neighborhood integrity will remain intact because of the care that we've put into the design for the signs. The retail operations have been conducted on the property since the 1930s. In the Wolfeboro history, it talks about Alan Albee selling some antiques there in 1932. As Route 28 was improved over the years and the speed limit increased, the need became inherent for the larger signs to be constructed. And as you may still have in the packet some of the pictures of some of the large signs in the area. The literal enforcement of the existing sign ordinance creates a hardship for me, for our businesses. The literal enforcement of the existing zoning is much too small for a sign to be legibly read in that area. So this is why I'm asking for the 12 square feet for each sign. And because of the special conditions set forth, we don't feel we can reasonably use the property to its best ability and maintain a strict conformance with the current ordinance without requesting a variation, because the property is zoned residential in this business area. And as you know, in the residential area, a sign for 12 square feet is not allowed. The restriction to a smaller size is unreasonable. It is an 8-acre parcel. There are 3 separate businesses in the area, and the speed allowed on the state road requires a larger sign to be legible for the motorists, and as I previously mentioned, for the safety factor. We've observed a couple of accidents, and we've certainly seen our tire marks from people stepping on the brakes too hard to make the turn. That's the extent of my presentation. Questions?
Questions?
It says on the document that you'd have the appropriate posts high enough, but yet on this graph here, it says 180 inches. Should that be 108 inches, which is what's currently there? It's written along the side.
I see on the side there, the 180 inches tall. I believe that's the maximum that the ordinance allows. I'd have to get clarification from Matt on that.
Not to exceed 15 feet,
Okay, so that would be 150.
180 inches.
The current post is 108 measured.
Okay.
And then secondly, it says 9-inch by 12-inch shielded LED lights. I see 2 circles on the top of the signs. Is that it, the lights
That's
facing?
the lights facing down, right, 2 on each side.
Okay, thank you.
The 180 feet, is that including the finials on the top?
I believe it does, because generally, as Jerome is pricing, he's pricing out everything from the top down.
Okay, so the height restriction is within limits. I have a question and an opinion about the antique sign that's on the barn. You're asking for a new antique sign. Originally, you asked for 2 signs. Now you're asking for 3. The antique barn sign is new with this application, and this is a new application. But there is a sign on the face of the barn. It's been there for eons.
Right.
It's been there at least for 20 years.
Right.
I'm in the antique business. I happen to know, with a big sign like that, I know what's inside. It's an antique business. It's attached to the side of the barn. That is an antique business sign. And so you're going to be asking for 2 signs for 1 business.
When I put the barn into historic preservation easement, I included the pictures of the barn with the antique sign, and the entire front, back, and sides of the barn were accepted in historic easement with that sign included. And I was told at that point I couldn't take that sign down, and I can't repaint it with other text.
Well, you can. In the historic district, you can take it down, and under a preservation easement, you are allowed to improve such an item. So that's, I'm not saying you have to take it down. I'm saying you're asking for a sign in addition to that business sign. That antique sign doesn't say it's an antique barn, it's an antique business, and it has been for over 20 years. And I'm having a problem that you're asking for an additional sign.
Matt, if that was put into the historical aspect of the town, would that be excluded from this other sign request?
My opinion on this matter, and I actually gave this opinion at the last meeting as well, is because of the barn easement and the historic character, my understanding that that antique lettering on the top of the barn is part of the historic character of that barn. I had suggested at the prior meeting that signage was in fact exempt from the sign ordinance. So my opinion was contrary to Suzanne's, although I understand that the ordinance is sort of silent on this sort of issue, particularly when it's a historic structure. But my opinion was that I would likely exempt that should it be part of the historic barn easement. But that's my opinion.
Well, it meets the definition of a wall sign. And under our ordinance, a sign that is allowed, which is a, if I can find it, it's before enforcement.
But this board has an opportunity tonight, if they feel that both items are signs, then you either have the opportunity to grant the variance under that exception, under accepting that, or you have the option, of course, to say no and deny that portion of the
Right.
variance request. So that's sort of why, you can either listen to my opinion or not, but I think that the ordinance is not particularly clear on this, though it could be said that it is a strict wall sign by design.
Well, because there is a definition in our ordinance for wall signs.
Correct.
And it's a percentage that it's allowed, and there's
Yep.
certain criteria. That fits the definition of a wall sign. It's not in violation of the wall sign, and it's been used as a business wall sign for 20 years. And so I view it as a request for two signs in a GR district for one business. As one member, at least, I have a problem with that. Now we're requesting 3 signs on a post instead of 2 signs.
Question? How far back is the existing post from the street, roughly? In your scale, it looks like it's about 20 feet back.
It looks to be about 40 feet
40 feet? Okay.
from the street, from the road.
Okay, and the post that's going to be the nearest to the street would be where your existing post is now?
Honestly, it depends on where we can put it into the ground, but for the purpose of the board, I'd say yes.
It'd be, so if we said no closer than 40 foot to the road, that would be acceptable to you?
I'm looking at my,
Yeah, please feel free to consult with your expert.
Jerome, you think that we can say that? Okay. Yes, for the post closest to the road.
Thank you. Sarah?
But I used to be a draftsman, and when I scale this off of the plan, 40 feet would be right there where it says existing light. That's 40 feet. Where it says existing 4x4 wood post appears to be was slightly over the 20 feet.
I'd go with the plan that Heidi has there.
You're
Okay.
looking at the little piece that I provided.
Yeah, 'cause this looks like it's got a fold in it, and can't be sure what that scale is.
Okay. Can I have a couple of comments and questions? I looked at Matt's memorandum, and it shows 175-44 signs, and very clearly says types of signs, and it includes wall signs and freestanding or ground signs. And I have to say that that antique sign looks like an antique sign to me, and I think it looks as if there would then be 2 signs for that one business, plus the 2 signs for the other 2 businesses, which would be 4 in total. And I know Fred was just asking a question about how far is that post, because it came up when we were out there. If you take and stockpile all these signs like a totem pole, and you have people coming down the end of trotting track, they glance up there, they barely stop, and they pull out. And something this big that would go down that close to the ground would clearly block cars coming into town. And I just wonder about it. I think it's excessive signage based on the fact that we just passed regulations saying a freestanding sign would be 1 square foot. And these are 3 12 square foot each, which is a gross exaggeration of our brand-new zoning for which the planning board spent a great deal of time looking at, reviewing, and for which the people that live in town voted resoundingly in favor of. And I feel like that is a mandate for our board.
As far as the antique sign on the side of the barn, at least from my perspective, it's not visible until you're literally passing by it. I mean, they're large letters, but you literally have to glance over to the side in order to see it. And the sign that she's requesting, you will be able to see as you're driving towards it and avoiding slamming on your brakes and trying to make a quick turn. So I mean, I appreciate the historic nature of that sign on the barn, but that was not placed there by the applicant, and it's really not visible until you're right upon it. I mean, because it's set far enough back from the road, at least in my estimation. I also had another point, but now I forget what it is, so.
I do want to make a comment to Sarah's comment about the sign and coming from trotting track. If you are at the end of trotting track at the stop sign, this sign is further away from 28 than where Route 28 used to be 40 years ago. So there's a bridge that 28 crosses, and then there's another old bridge that looks like it's actually part of my property, my front lawn. This sign would be closer to the house than that second bridge. So if you put, and I'm sorry I don't have the measurement, if you put a measurement from the tar, you're all the way back almost to the edge of my pavement where we start the parking area. So if you're at the stop sign, you're beyond where this sign sits on the lawn.
Does the current sign there right now have an existing variance approved for it?
The 1810 house sign has an approval prior to when I purchased the property.
Excuse me, I asked the
sorry.
town planner to look into the files to see how these signs evolved. Could you comment on that, please?
The building file for this property, which contains sign permits, typically, does not include a clear approval for the existing 1810 house sign. There's no such sign in the file. There is a real estate sign that's approved for the property. There are several pictures that are quite old that show a sign there, but there's no clear sign permit approval in the file that I could locate when I reviewed it today. So.
Sarah?
Yeah, I have no problem with the enlarged antique sign on the barn. That's a pre-existing non-conforming. But I just think that, 313 feet of frontage people can glance over and see it if they're interested. And the fact that it was purported to be a business district, I would like to point out that Bradley's moved a business out to what is now Sal's, and it failed because it was too far from the center of town to attract people there. And I live out in the agricultural district, slightly beyond there, so I go this route all the time. And the business district is downtown. And I believe that the reason the planning board has restricted the size of signs is because people in that neighborhood do not want proliferation of more signs, of which there are many which are not the size that are currently allowed, and some such as the sign that's for the boat museum turned out to be above and beyond that which it did have a permit for. So I just think that you can't say that literal enforcement of the existing sign ordinance creates a hardship for this particular business or any one of the three businesses, because everyone out there in that area now that wants to put up a new sign is going to have to abide by this. And so you're not creating a hardship for this one particular business that's any different from the regulations that now apply to everyone in that particular zone.
I disagree respectfully, Sarah. I do believe there is a hardship. The applicant purchased the property, and the sign ordinance was different at that time. And so I think I think that we should consider perhaps a compromise between the full model that she's asking for and what, the one-by-one that has now been approved. Because when she bought that may have had an impact on her buying the business if she knew she wasn't going to be able to place signage on the road for people to see her business.
Well, she was going to plant grapes all out in front of that barn. They haven't happened yet. But also, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, but when a zoning change comes up, as soon as they start talking about it, it's my understanding that you have to comply with it just in case it passes. So the law is saying, here's your notice. If you haven't done it already, you have to comply with the new regulations. And I don't see the fact that she didn't apply before as a hardship.
Again, I respectfully disagree. But
Well, I guess we'll agree to disagree.
Matt, what is the normal, or the setback for signs?
So the zoning ordinance actually makes it clear in the freestanding signs section that signs are to be set back 20 feet from the property line, particularly freestanding signs. So that would be the setback enforced here from the property line again, which in this case likely would not be the edge of pavement, but it would be somewhere that we would identify on the site plan when the sign permit.
And that's
is final.
considered freestanding even with posts in the ground?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, and they have to get a building permit because it's anchored to the ground. It's like a structure. Back to the antique sign on the barn. That barn is 60 to 80 feet long, roughly. That sign is half that size. You don't miss that sign when you're going by that barn. You do not miss that sign.
I agree. You don't miss it when you're driving by. You don't see it in advance so that you can make the turn into the business to patronize that business.
Anybody
you
that's
have to go
looking
past
for
it.
an antique shop to shop in will not miss that sign, whether they are approaching the barn, go by the barn, or pass the barn. That sign catches your eye. There's no doubt about it. It's humongous. So, I just have a problem adding another sign. And again, to what Sarah was saying, this ordinance passed overwhelmingly by the voters of this town, this new ordinance. Now, maybe the planning board could have critiqued it a little better because of the quirks about the zone out there, but it is what it is. And I think to waver from that, right off the bat, the first person in the door, the brand-new ordinance, where do we go from there? Nowhere but downhill. I think we should uphold that ordinance if there's any one of the 5 criteria that cannot be met. And I would also add that when this ordinance was redone, for the GR zone, they were actually a little more liberal. They took out, they added on a residential use, they added, you can have 2 signs for home occupation. They, temporary event permit, they increased that. Temporary signs, they increased that. A wall sign was not permitted on the old ordinance, and it is permitted now, 1 wall sign. And freestanding sign was permitted, but they've clarified now 1. And I wish we had had a copy of the new revision. I'm taking the old one and marking it up.
So just to be clear about the justification for this zoning change by the planning board, there was a blatant contradiction in the sign ordinance that had to be addressed. And essentially what it was is that under the permitted versus not permitted table that's in the sign ordinance, certain types of signs were indicated as permitted in a given zone, but then once you went to the dimensional table, which follows it, it then said that that same type of signage was not permitted. So there was a blatant contradiction between permitted and not permitted. So what the planning board attempted to do with freestanding signs as an example in the GR zone is if it was indicated as a permitted type of signage, they gave some allowance. In this case, it was 1 square foot, which is very small, in order to address that contradiction, not wanting to establish a higher threshold like 10 square feet because they weren't certain about what the consequences would be in some of these residential zones where this type of signage was permitted. Does that clarify why the change was made by the planning board? It was really to address a contradiction.
Well, they worked a good amount of time and meetings on it.
Yep.
You know, and as I say, first person in the door, I think would just be weakening the intent and spirit of what their work was about and what the voters voted.
It seems to me that the location of this property is unique. It also seems to me that when you look at the surrounding area, you see businesses, you see very few residential uses. If this were a residence that had been converted to a business and every other surrounding property was a residence without a business, I would agree that the sign ordinance ought to be upheld. I think one of the reasons why they created this board was to take a look at what the particular circumstances are in a particular case. And even though our fellow voters said, yes, we want to restrict the size of signs, they still left us with the power to grant a variance in an appropriate case. And I think when I drive, and I did that tonight, I took a ride up to the 7-Eleven, turned around and came back down. I think it's fair to say that this property is in a business district, maybe not designed to be a business district, but is a de facto business district. And the businesses right across the street and up the street have signs of significant size. So I don't have a problem with having a sign of this size, not addressing how many yet, that is visible as you drive by. I've driven by that place many times. I happen to know the antique sign is there, but if I'm just driving by, my vision is not going to cover that antique sign. I'm going to have to take my eyes off the road, which my GPS tells me I shouldn't be doing. Every time I start off the car, I have to say, I agree not to take my eyes off the road to look at this damn piece of equipment. So I see a reason for making an exception here, notwithstanding the planning board's view on this. And I accept Matt's explanation that this was a first step, perhaps, into eliminate, or at least a step to eliminate an ambiguity or a contradiction. So my feeling is I don't have a problem with signs this size. I think the question is whether the 3 of them are appropriate. And I think the one issue that I saw that I thought had something that we ought to discuss is whether having the 3 of them there blocks the view. And on my site visit tonight, I stood where the existing post is, and I could see at least 2 car lanes if they stopped at the stop sign on Trotting Track Road. So I think somebody making a left turn there has a very unobstructed view of 28, of traffic coming down 28, even if it is at 55 miles an hour. So I don't think this is an obstruction, and the reason why I asked how far back it would be is I think we want to maintain that line of sight so that people can see for safety reasons. So I don't have any issue with having at least 2 of the 3 signs there, and frankly, I'm leaning towards saying the 3rd sign is not going to add any. Once you allow the first 2, the 3rd one is almost accepted. I don't have a problem with the 3rd one either, and I think it gives the driver a much better opportunity to see it in time to take action to slow down. So I do see it being a safety issue. Other discussion? I don't want to dominate this. Other discussion?
Matt? Do you have any of the charts from New Hampshire DOT about the number of signs within a certain number of feet? They have I believe it's a chart or a matrix that shows that if you have X number of signs within a quarter of a mile, people don't, A, get a chance to read them because there are too many, B, they become clutter and distracting. You don't have a copy of that, do you? Okay, maybe Dave Ford does. Okay.
Any other questions for the applicant? Any other discussion?
I do think the board needs to address the issue of the number of signs based on the conversation tonight. I think that has to be a part of this consideration of the variance. There's no way to vote on the variance without addressing that question at all.
And what I was thinking of doing is proposing 2 motions. One motion to allow the construction of the structure with 2 signs, the winery and the 1810 house, and then a second motion allowing the installation of the antique sign. And that way we can have a clear distinction between the 2, and those who feel that the antique sign on the freestanding sign is not necessary can have their vote and have their voice.
I think we're wandering off into the deliberations of the 5 criteria.
Well, no, I'm suggesting what I would want to consider, so then we would look at the criteria at this point with that in mind. And we could do the criteria twice if you'd like, so that we can have a firm basis for making the second decision.
So it boils down to the number of signs and the size of the signs.
No, I don't think that we've agreed that we're going to allow a sign at all, but that's part of the discussion.
No signs.
I was just suggesting a way of approaching this. Sarah, and then I'll get to you.
Do you want to say something first, Matt?
Okay.
3. Isn't it 3?
I can't hear you without you using the microphone. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I would suggest addressing these 3 signs independently, perhaps with independent votes. Then you can have the discussion about the antique sign in detail.
But I have a question for Matt while he's there. Okay, relative to the preservation of the barn,
Yep.
I thought that the barn was put, I thought she went to the Board of Selectmen and had a reduction of her taxes for the barn. Has it been changed to some kind of special preservation that's recognized by the state of New Hampshire?
I mean, I believe it's under 79D, correct? It's a preservation easement under RSA 79D that has certain stipulations, I believe, for property owners. If they get that tax exemption or under that statute, there are certain things they have to do to maintain the property and the use within the barn as well. So it's a state statute, but there is a role of the Board of Selectmen as well.
Yeah, I know they're supposed to preserve the barn, but I just question whether that statute says you have to keep the sign.
I don't think the statute specifically says that, but I also recognize that specific requirements, my understanding is specific requirements can be placed on individual easements, but
Do we have a requirement list that shows that that sign has to be maintained?
not that I'm aware of.
Okay, and don't get me wrong, I don't have any problem with that. That's a pre-existing non-conforming sign, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not aware of any specific language that required them to maintain that sign. And even if that did exist, I think the same question would be before the board. Do you want to allow the additional sign or not? So I think that's somewhat irrelevant to the consideration, but I think it is an important point to make.
I might have lost something here, but I don't think we're talking about taking the sign off. We're not talking about taking the antique sign down, are we?
No.
No.
No, we're
was your
talking
point?
about the number of signs that she can have, and if she can only have one sign for the antique business, then I am trying to determine if she has an option of a choice to keep the one on the barn or get this new one that she might like.
Well, I think we should save that for the deliberation part.
Any other discussion? So are we in agreement then that we will approach it as one sign with the support posts as planned? And then the second would be to add a second, and the third motion would be to add a third sign.
One sign,
Well, you need the post to put the sign up, right? So the first motion would be, the first discussion would be whether we want to permit the posts to be put in, the 108-inch posts with the lighting and one sign,
I see where you're going.
okay?
Because the existing sign does not have a variance.
The existing sign is not a part of the variance.
A sign in what size?
Well, that's something we
In
can discuss.
accordance with,
We've been asked.
is the public hearing closed? Are we deliberating?
We haven't closed it.
No, it has not been closed. I thought we opened it. Oh, I'm sorry. The public hearing is open.
Okay.
Is it closed?
No, it's open.
It's open?
Open.
Well, then I think that gets into the deliberation of deciding what to do about the signs after we've heard everything.
Let me ask if there's anyone who wishes to speak in favor of this. Joan, sir, please come up.
I'm Jerome Holden, JC Signs. The sign ordinance was recently voted on was just to change and clarify some language that was incongruent or something with some new state regulations that said they couldn't be content-based. And this 1 square foot that you're talking about, I personally had never seen it in the ordinance before, but Matt assured me that it was there already. Is that true?
That was adopted this year. That was one of the changes made this year. The 1 square foot was added in place of where it said not permitted.
And it's 1 square foot in a residential district? And that's the only time it applies?
That's the only time that's relevant here.
The only time that the 1 square foot comes into effect is if you're asking to have a sign in a residential district with no permit, correct? That's correct. Okay. I make residential signs all the time, and most of them are 1.5 square feet or greater, so every single person is going to have to come for a permit according to that in a residential district. That's how, I don't know, it's kind of unreasonable in my view. When you have a 50-mile-an-hour zone or a 40-mile-an-hour zone, the International Sign Association recommends 21-inch letters with that setback in that speed zone. So really the appropriate size is the size of All About Kitchens, which is, I think it's 36 square feet, and the Wentworth Watershed Association, which is also 36 square feet. That should be that whole zone out there. It should be from where the boat museum is out past 7-Eleven, because you just need that size for that setback to safely read those at the speed limit. There's also a thing known as a cone of vision, where you look about 10% left, right as you drive, you safely drive, and that makes it so you can see these signs at that distance while you're driving without turning your head. That's another International Sign Association recommendation. There are no abutters here objecting to this that I know of, the size of the sign. There's only one residential house out there in that whole road that I know of, and it's considered this residential district. And then you have a bunch of really large signs, like for the Nick and for Allen A Resort, right in view, but a really long ways away, probably close to 300 feet away. So there's no problem with sign overload. And And the view from Trotting Track Road is definitely not obstructed by the sign. I think you're a good 50 to 75 feet back from that stop sign before this sign could possibly obstruct your view. In fact, I think the Nick sign would obstruct your view the other way before this sign would obstruct your view going toward her place. I think that's all I had. Thank you.
I missed making the note on what size did you say that the sign association recommends for a 50-mile-an-hour zone?
36 square feet with 21-inch letters. She's asking for 12 square feet and only 6-inch letters.
Per sign.
Per sign, yes, and she actually could be asking for 3 36-square-foot signs, and she's only asking for 1 36-square-foot sign with these 3 on it. So I think it's very reasonable, especially compared to the rest of the signs around her.
Sorry, Sarah.
Yeah, but that can be a little misleading, because when you talk about a 55-mile-an-hour road, you're not talking about the road as it's changing right into 40 miles an hour and heading into downtown. A normal 55-mile-an-hour road is you go out and look at Route 16, and they allow enormous billboards out there, which we definitely don't want right downtown where we are. So that's a little bit of a misleading argument, I think. And I would just like to ask the code enforcement officer, can I ask him a question? Yeah. Have you ever made a judgment as to whether that antique sign on the barn is a sign or if it's just a decoration or whatever? I have not. So if I was to come to you and say, there's something on the barn that says antiques and they want another one here, am I totally misled in thinking that you're having 2 signs for one business, in your opinion?
I think you could consider that a sign.
Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? In favor? Anyone wish to speak against the application? Okay, I'll close the public hearing. Thank you for your participation. And first, we ought to discuss how do we want to approach this?
I think it's logical what you laid out is to approach this from, okay, we've got 2 posts that want to have a sign. What size sign and how many signs? The issue of one for every business would need to be factored into that, along with the 5 criteria.
Other thoughts?
I think Matt's right that we should address each sign one at a time for each business.
And I'd just like to add a postscript to that. We go through this on Route 28, the signs, the businesses, what can be allowed, the residential mix in there. I've never been, no matter previous planning board, a fan of mixed uses in a residential zone. It just, they fly in each other's face. If the people that have the general residential zone applied to their area don't like the zoning, let them petition or work with the planning board to change that zone. So we're not putting the town in this position all the time of, we allow a motorcycle shop, we allow an auto repair shop, we allow the used cars, we allow then the signs, and we go. So if this were to fail tonight, my word of advice would be to not only this applicant, but anyone else that lives along that strip, work with the planning board to change the zoning to accommodate commercial businesses on Route 28 and be done with it. With that said, we'll go through the criteria.
There's a residence just the other side of Sal's business, 2 houses down. So there are residences in the neighborhood.
Then, number 1,
Number 1.
the variance is not contrary to the public interest. The proposed use must not conflict with the explicit or implicit purpose of the ordinance. That is something that we always should go back to when we do any of these variances, and what is the purpose and intent of the ordinance? And I read from 175:44. It is the purpose and intent of this section to provide control of the erection, installation, and maintenance of sign for the purpose of uniformity with aesthetic values as called for in the master plan. And somewhere I wrote what the master plan said. With aesthetic values per the master plan and general welfare and safety. So that's my comment, and I don't think that this meets the spirit of the ordinance.
Other comments?
Suzanne, do you have a copy of the master plan there?
Pardon me?
You have the whole master plan. And what does the master plan talk about attracting economic development in Wolfeboro so that we can encourage businesses to come to Wolfeboro? I mean, isn't that part of the master plan as well?
A sign, one robin doesn't make a spring, a sign doesn't make a business. That's my
We've had a lot of different entities from the Economic Development Committee and whatnot do surveys a number of times, at least 3 that I remember. And it seems like the town is pretty well divided between wanting to turn into more economic development and people that want to keep the town more quaint without the, the box stores and the McDonald's and everything.
Understood.
And I think one of the things that comes through is that the planning board has had guidance from people, because they voted for it, to cut down on the number of signs out there.
But I also think that we have an economic development council that is encouraging businesses to come to Wolfeboro, certain businesses.
Well,
I'm not talking chain stores and McDonald's drive-throughs. I'm
There's been
talking
businesses
about
there since
business.
1932, so
Understood, and probably the
without the
1810 house has
signs,
been there for a long time.
without these big signs.
My feeling is that this is a business that's allowed to operate there. It's a business that is in an area where there are a lot of other businesses that are also allowed to operate there. And I think if you want to be in business, you need to have something that says, I'm in business, here's what I do.
And it has been in business for quite some time.
That has been there for a long time. I do not think that it's contrary to the public interest to allow the posts, and since we're talking about the first sign, and the first sign to be there, it is not out of the ordinary for that area. It is very similar to what other businesses have in that area.
Can you clarify what you consider the first business to be? Is it the winery as shown at the top of these posts?
I think it could, well, let's do it in that order. We'll do the winery first, then we do the 1810 house, and then the antiques barn. So my view is that I think the spirit is observed because the businesses are an allowed use on the property. I think the professionally made sign, assuming that'll be maintained, which it would be in the business owner's interest to do so, will look nice. I don't have any issue with giving the variance. I think it will not be contrary to the public interest in this instance, and I take to heart the fact that we just had a vote of the population to restrict the size of signs. I don't think that if you'd asked the population, if this had been put up where it was A, B, C, D, E, and if that area was asked, people are asked, would you want to reduce the size of signs out there? My guess is there'd be no, but that wasn't the question. So I think we're here to give to decide whether a variance is appropriate, and I think the spirit of the ordinance is observed here. And I think that it will not be contrary to the public interest because these businesses are allowed to operate there.
Well, we're going to talk about the size of the sign then, this winery sign?
The proposal is to have a sign
12 square feet.
12 square feet. So we're going to, the purpose of the first resolution would be to permit the 12 square foot sign in approximate dimensions as shown on posts on the approximate dimensions as shown that are not more than 108 inches high with two shielded lights on top that is not less than 40 feet back from the road.
I don't have any problem with the posts.
You just don't like
But
the
this-
signs
but
between the
this-
posts, right?
The size of the sign, and I'm asking for some help here. Size of sign, according to the ordinance, when there's a two-face sign, the sign area for the sign with more than one face shall be computed by adding together the area of all sign faces visible from any one point. When two identical sign faces are placed back to back so that both faces cannot be viewed from any point at the same time, and when such sign faces are part of the same sign structure and not more than, might be the old, 24 inches, sign area shall be computed by the measurement of one of the faces. So we can like just mentally just think of just this front of the sign and just ignore the back side?
I think that's what you just
Is
read.
that what that means?
That's what that means, yes.
Seems as though they could have done it in a few words, but
People who wrote those get paid by the words.
that it was a little bit, when you read the whole thing, it was a little bit complicated. All right, I just needed to clarify for myself what we were talking about for square footage, whether we
Okay.
counted the front and the back, but you're saying just
It's the
take one side and that's the square footage. And how
size
much,
of the board.
how much excess of that, of what we currently allow is that sign?
12 square feet.
About what?
12 square feet.
That's what they're asking for, but the
34 by
ordinance
52
is-
is what
Well, they-
they've asked for.
Yeah,
Right. It's how much over?
11
square feet. Over.
over. I'd like to can I make one comment on item 1 and 3? I was in the paper industry for 35 years, and every meeting, the first thing out of the gate was safety. And driving down that street, those signs are very small, and when you look at it, public safety and driving and signage, I don't think that sign is too big. Especially when you see the sign and the driveway is very, very close to where the sign is.
Okay, thank you. Other comments on 1 and 2? Item 3, substantial justice is done. I think
I think they meet number 3.
yes, I think so too. I think the design of the sign is, the size of the sign is necessary because of the speed limits there, even if it's just 40 miles an hour. We've had testimony from our sign builders that the associations that set standards would have a much larger sign in this position. So I think certainly my feeling is that that substantial justice would be done here because of the design elements, and it allows for clear visibility and safer driving.
And it really conforms with the other 4 signs that were presented that are within a very short distance of this building.
The value of the surrounding properties will not be diminished.
I think we have no professional testimony one way or the other, but the argument's been made that the area is such that there are signs everywhere, so the value wouldn't be diminished.
Okay. One more isn't going to make a difference.
Agree.
One more isn't going to make a difference.
More.
Literal enforcement would result in an unnecessary hardship.
Well, I go down to, is there a reasonable use other than what they're asking for? And I think they have plenty of frontage and they have plenty of room for a sign, but I'm just hung up on the size of the sign. I don't have a problem with a sign and a post. I have a problem with the size. Given that we just passed a new ordinance, I'd like to try and rein that in to show a little bit of respect for that ordinance such as it is. And that's the other that's the other use. I see it as another way to get around number 5.
And are you looking then to reduce the number of signs or the size of each of those?
Excuse me?
Your comment could be interpreted two ways. One, that you think just one sign or two signs would be appropriate because of the action the town citizens took, or are you saying that the size of each sign should be reduced?
The size of each 1 and 2 to be reduced. I'm not in favor of the third sign.
We're looking at number one now. So
All right,
yes.
number 1, reduce the size of the sign. That's something more in keeping with what the spirit of the ordinance is.
Fred? I think the size that they have requested is reasonable, and I understand the purpose of the ordinance, but clearly in that area, a sign 1 by 1 would be useless. There would be absolutely no point of having a sign that was 1 square foot. And so that would detract from her ability to run a business from that location. So I don't think that's reasonable in any way, shape, or form in this instance. And that's why we have the zoning board that can grant variances to allow people to run their businesses.
On the other 4 signs that are there, were they all granted variances?
No, they're either illegal, grandfathered, or non-conforming. There's very few, except maybe Sal's that came recently.
And all of these signs are also, except for Heckman's, are almost sitting right on the blacktop. They're very close to the road. Where
You
this would
can't
be
even,
further.
it's not even apples to apples with what they're asking for and what's there. You just have to move beyond what's there and not try to say, well, because they do it, I
think
want
it's
to
valid to
do
look
it.
at it.
What's that?
It's valid to look at it, to consider it.
Okay. Other comments?
I don't have a problem with the winery having a sign, but I am just a little appalled at something that it's 11 times bigger than what's allowed.
And it's probably, correct me if I'm wrong, probably half the size that would be recommended by the professionals?
I know, but I
One-third of the size, okay.
don't think we can ask him questions because we're in deliberations.
I'll reopen the public hearing.
You have to ask us if
Can I
you
reopen the public hearing?
Yes.
Purpose of asking one question? Thank you. What is the recommended, we're, when you get this color here, your memory fades a little bit, so.
Yes, 36 square feet is what's recommended, 21-inch letters in that speed zone with that setback.
Okay, thank you. So what we're being asked to approve for variance is 1/3 of what would be recommended for this
I
area.
know, and I'll still say, Fred, they're
For each
talking about
sign.
Route 16 when they say 55 miles an hour. They're not talking about heading into our little hamlet.
Fred, I'm willing to make a motion.
Please do.
I move that we grant the variance under Section 6, Section 17544 of the Wolfeboro Planning and Zoning Ordinance to allow one sign totaling 12 square feet that states Winnipesaukee Winery, mounted in a vertical manner on the property located at 458 Center Street, tax map number 148-12, with the 4 conditions contained in the March 27, 2018 memorandum by the Director of Planning and Development.
Thank you. Is there a second? I'll second the motion. Any further discussion? I'll call for a vote. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No.
Opposed.
I'll have to read down. Sue? Yes?
Aye, yes.
Sarah? No?
No.
Yes from,
I'm happy about the sign, but I'm not happy about the size.
so it's yes?
Yes.
Yes. No, so it's 3-2 for the first sign. Let's move on to the second sign, which is the 1810 house sign.
Do we need to go through the criteria again, or can I make the motion on the second sign as well?
Is there any other discussion?
What's that?
Is there any other discussion on the motion, before we make a motion to approve the second sign?
Well, we should go through the same 5 criteria.
Is there
I
any,
think the results would be similar.
is there any different points that you'd like to make on any of those 5 criteria? Because I think I've said everything.
None here.
Suzanne, I don't want us to wish to quell any discussions. If you have other items you want to raise, please feel free to do so.
That's all right. Yeah.
Any others?
Go for it.
Okay, I'll move that we grant the variance under Section 6, Section 175-44 of the Wolfeboro Planning and Zoning Ordinance to allow one sign totaling 12 square feet that states 1810 House Bed and Breakfast, mounted in a vertical manner on the property located at 458 Center Street, tax map number 148-12, with the 4 conditions contained in the March 27, 2018 memorandum by the Director of Planning and Development.
And that sign be in addition to the Winnipesaukee Winery sign.
Yes.
Should that also have a statement in there that it'll be no closer to the road than the existing sign? Because there was nothing about measurement.
I think we probably ought to add that to it. It'd be no closer to the road than 40 feet.
There's another,
Can I just check something?
Discussion now, yes.
Yeah, I just thought we had originally established that we were going to have one set of 2 posts.
Correct.
One sign with-
Therefore,
But in the
that
first motion, I don't think it was, there was a,
it wasn't included, okay,
right.
fine, thank you.
and with the approval of sign 1 and 2, am I correct in assuming that the other signs will not be there? I mean, I think there was an old sign for the 1810 bed and breakfast. That's coming down. So I think at the end of this, we better clarify any of the other signs
I think it would be appropriate.
related to the winery or the bed and
I think it
breakfast
would be
need to come
appropriate
down.
to amend this resolution to include that condition that the existing sign be removed.
I mean, these aren't in addition to those signs.
Existing sign would be, existing 1810 house sign would be removed if this one's
Well, I think
granted.
it has to be in the,
Let's amend,
You want to add it to the motion, Susan?
I can add it to the motion, but I think Matt's condition number 1 says it has to, the town sign permit approval has to, it pertains, and that is only 1 per business, correct? Correct, but I think there's no harm in adding. Okay, so added.
okay.
I second.
Any further discussion? All right, I'll call for a vote. Susan?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
Fred, yes.
Aye.
Tim, yes. Suzanne?
Aye.
Yes. Okay. So there's now 2 signs. The third sign, Antiques Barn.
well, the 5 criteria, when you get to the last one about
Special conditions.
the reasonableness of it and other alternatives, I think the sign that's on the barn suffices, and I do not see the need to add that other sign. I think they could advertise very nicely that the winery and bed and breakfast is located at the 1812 Antique Barn, and give note to that through their paper advertisement and so forth. They don't need another sign. It's overkill.
Okay. Other comments? Sarah?
I would just refer back to my question of the codes enforcement officer, and it appears as if there is already a sign for the Antiques Barn. And I think that if someone's going by, they see all these other signs, they're going to slow down, take a peek, they'll see that huge, and I forget how many feet they estimated it was, antiques sign on the barn, which I think is much quainter and much more preferable to a modern antiques sign. And so therefore, I would say, I would deny this third sign as being redundant.
It goes back to the purpose and intent of the ordinance, the uniformity and aesthetic value. And that antique sign on the barn does the aesthetic value part to the neighborhood. I would hate to see another modern sign added.
And it seems to qualify for the definition for a wall sign.
Do you feel that the existence of the sign on the barn itself undercuts any of the 5 criteria?
I think the addition of another sign undercuts the 5 criteria by being a duplicate sign.
That's all I wanted to...
Yes.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Any other comments, questions? All
I'd
right,
like to make a motion to
Suzanne?
deny the applicant the third sign, antique barn sign, for case 07V18, variance from Article 175-44.
Any, with the subject, any other conditions, or anybody wants to add something?
Not sure she's finished.
Oh, you're not, sorry.
I said that?
So, no, that was,
Case number.
okay. Oh, I'm reading that.
Because it does not meet which criteria, do you want to specify which criteria you feel it doesn't meet?
Because it doesn't meet the 5 criteria, the spirit of the ordinance, and the 5th criteria, which there are reasonable options, which is that there is a pre-existing sign.
Okay. Is there a second?
Yes.
Before you go there, on, one of the documents says it's case number 07V18. On Matt's document, it says 08V18. Which one is it?
It is 08V18. 07V18 was withdrawn by the same applicant.
Okay, and
So your motion
to
would be
clarify that, I would put tax map 148-012, so that will certainly clarify that.
Robin,
I did see
you
that.
have that change? Okay. Okay. Motion's been made. Do we have a second?
I did.
Okay, I'm sorry. Any further discussion? All right, I'll call for a vote. Sue?
I vote no, nay.
I vote yes. I think we should support our code enforcement officer and our regulations, our zoning.
Okay, so you vote to deny the third sign.
Do.
I vote no.
Yes,
Yes being,
in favor of the motion.
okay,
Oh, no, I'm
Oh,
in
I'm
favor.
sorry, then I am in favor of the motion.
Let's
No for
clarify.
the sign, in favor of the motion.
yes for the motion.
Yes for the motion.
It says no sign.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Is this a denial with or without prejudice? Because I do think that is a critical issue here. If the applicant were to remove the antique signage, would this variance be considered by the board? So I think that.
It doesn't say that here.
No,
that
I'm
they
just
want
saying that I'm not sure, I just wanted to make it clear, with or without prejudice is this denial.
I read the motion as saying, so
just
long
wanna
as
make
the
it clear.
sign is on the building, that removes the
With
criteria.
prejudice.
Okay,
With
okay,
prejudice.
okay, I just want to make it clear.
Yeah.
Okay.
And my second, that's fine. If they took it off the building, then they should get another sign. in.
Agreed.
Okay. You agree.
With prejudice.
With prejudice would mean if we deny it, they cannot come back.
Yeah.
So if they took the sign off the building,
No, we're not taking the sign off the
or
building.
if they took the sign off the building,
They could come
Well,
back.
we already heard that historically they really shouldn't, so.
I,
If the
if there's a storm that comes through and destroys the barn, I don't think there's an
If
obligation.
it's an act of God, they can put it back. But if
They
they,
don't have to.
if the circumstances of the zoning change or anything such as that, that they can come back. It's if nothing changes, then they couldn't come back.
Okay, I'll accept that. So it's unanimous. Sorry to the third sign.
I wasn't unanimous. I was a holdout on that one. Yeah,
And I'm in favor of the motion. Yes, sorry. So the motion carried to deny the third sign.
And Fred, I would like to state for the record that I do support the code enforcement officer and his opinion, that has nothing to do with my vote.
No offense. You have a tough job. Okay. I think that disposes of this matter. Thank you very much for your
Yeah.
attendance and for your help on this.
I got, ooh, cheapest. Sorry.
Brian Hill.
No, that was me, I think.
No, it was Suzanne, I think. It wasn't Suzanne, that she didn't support it.
I need a second to get my papers
Okay.
mixed up.
Okay.
I thought that was going to be the short one.
All right. Last case, please. Thank you.
The final case before the ZBA this evening is case number 09-SE-18 concerning tax map number 190-20. Applicant is Pine Hill Road Realty Trust, LLC. This is a public hearing for a special exception under Article 6, Section 175-43, subsection A.1 of the Wolfeboro Planning and Zoning Ordinance to allow for the addition of a 35 by 96-foot storage building, 3,360 square feet, close to an open portico located on the existing house, adding parking, paving, and relocating and increasing the size of the detention basin. The property is located at 18 Pine Hill Road. A site visit was held this evening at approximately 6:35, and all at this table were in attendance. Copies of this notice were provided to the appropriate town offices and to Pine Hill Road Realty Trust, LLC, Petrie, Edmonds, Bellini Brothers Incorporated, Peter and Teresa Sullivan, 2007 Trust, Goodhue Hawkins Realty Property, LLC, John H. Osgood Revocable Trust, Judy B. Osgood Revocable Trust, and Brown Engineering and Surveying, LLC.
Thank you. Before we get into this, I think there's a typo in the notice. I think it's to allow for the addition of the 35 by 96-foot storage building. Then it should be a comma, enclose an open portico.
That's what we were told
That's
at
what
the
it,
site.
at the site visit. And then add
The
parking.
applicant is nodding in the affirmative to your,
Yeah. So we would consider it corrected as, because of their request to enclose the portico. Okay, we consider that.
It does say close in an open portico on page 5.
Okay. Welcome.
Thank you.
Would you please identify yourself for the public?
Scott Frankos from Brown Engineering and Surveying.
Thank you. And tell us why we should be granting your request.
Do you want me to go through the
Go through
site or
the-
how to?
Go through the application quickly and then,
With me tonight is Chris Pongraff, the owner of Pine Hill Storage. We're here tonight for a special exception which is allowed by Article 6, Section 175-43.A.1. The current property is the Pine Hill Storage Facility with 3 buildings, and on the color up to my left, the greenish color are the 3 existing buildings. The darker brown is the proposed building. And with the addition of the building, we had to add some parking and some pavement, which is the darker gray. And the lighter gray on the plan is all the existing pavement on site. The zone it is located in is Bay Street Limited Business District, which I guess was changed pretty recently. And it doesn't allow for a self-storage facility. But under the article for the special exception, it allows for an expansion of up to 25% of a non-conforming business within that zone. And that's what we're asking for. It's roughly 24 change of an expansion of what's there already. In addition to the building, we're adding 4 parking spaces, redelineating some of the parking to meet ADA requirements. The new structure to meet ADA requirements will have 6 units in it that are constructed to be ADA compliant. And the talk about the portico, as we did on the sidewalk, there's an office space. It's on the bottom right-hand corner of the plan. It's an open space right now. He'd like to close that in and do a automatic kiosk-type payment rental indoor facility there, so people can submit payments and.
But that would
sign
not
up
be
for-
increasing the footprint.
Excuse me?
It would not be increasing the footprint of the current structure.
I think it's, no, it would not the footprint itself.
To be clear, okay,
Also, with the addition of the building, there's an existing detention pond that will be relocated more west in the area that's green on the side of the gray area, dark gray parking. We submitted all the drainage, and it shows the same or a decrease of stormwater runoff from the site. And I'm not sure how the board usually handles it. Do you want me to walk through the criteria for the special exception?
Yes, please.
So again, we're asking for a special exception as provided in Section 6, or Article 6, Section 75-43.A.1, which is an expansion of an existing non-conforming use by no more than 25%. Facts supporting the request: number one, site suitability. The site is currently a self-storage facility, and this will be an expansion of less than 25%. Immediate neighborhood impact. The site is currently a self-storage facility, and the addition of less than 25% of storage, another typo. The increase to the traffic or noise will be negligible. The hours of operation will remain the same.
Is that 24 hours?
Is it?
Is that the way it is now?
Sorry. We have to record this for,
Yes, no, I'm sorry.
Can you identify yourself just for the record?
Chris Pongratz, and I am I guess technically I'd be the manager, and my wife and I run the storage facility. So Mr. McKenzie, Bob McKenzie, has run that self-storage facility more or less as it is today for, I believe, approximately 30 years or so. In that time, it has always been available and accessible to its patrons at any time. There's no physical barriers, gates, fences, et cetera, to keep the patrons out at any particular time. However, visits to the site after dark are very rare, from what I've been told, and so we didn't plan on making any restriction to what the current access is.
Okay. Thank you.
Criteria number 3, that there will be no undue nuisance or serious hazard to pedestrians or vehicle traffic, including the location and design of accessways and off-street parking. There will be no undue nuisance or serious hazard due to the modifications of the site. The new aisle will be 27 feet, and the entrance to the site will not be modified. And not within there, but I'll add to it, is that we're relining, restriping the parking to comply with ADA compliances and adding a van spot with offloading capabilities. Number 4, availability of public services and facilities. The proposed modification to this site has no increase to sewer, water needs. The stormwater drainage will be handled by relocating and increasing the size of the detention basin. No flammable items will be allowed to be stored in the units, and the existing fire protection hydrant at the entrance should be sufficient. The existing street, parks, and schools will not be impacted by this modification. Item number 5, appropriateness of the site plan. Consideration should be given to the following: parking scheme, traffic circulation, open space, fencing, screening, landscaping, signage, commercial vehicles, and light impact. The site is an existing storage facility, and the addition of a 35 by 96 building will have a 27-foot aisle located on both sides and access via the network of drives. No additional signage is proposed, and lighting will be the same as currently existing on the site. There is a little correction with that. We are adding 3 lights, as we discussed at the site, on the west side of the building to facilitate those units on that side, but none on the east side of the building. Item number 6, immediate neighborhood integrity. The established use is a self-storage facility, and this expansion is of the current use. Impact on property values. The proposed use is an expansion of the existing use and will not cause or contribute to the decline of property values of adjacent properties. The proposed use or structure inconsistent with the spirit of the ordinance and intent of the master plan. The proposed structure is an expansion of an existing business.
Thank you. Ms. Margaret.
Just one further clarification, and I'm not sure that it's necessary, but we had just an opportunity to discuss briefly with a couple of neighbors, abutters that came to the site visit, and I think what Scott was referring to at the site visit is we talked about with them, but I don't recall, did we talk about lighting at all?
Yes.
We did. Okay, all right, then my mistake, I apologize.
He said it would be,
On the house, yeah, they said they,
And he's talking about on the new.
on the new building.
Yeah, I'm talking about the new building.
Yeah.
So if I can... I'll try to speak up. So this is where the new building is located. So there are 3 existing light fixtures on the, I call it backside, the side away from the street on this building here, which is running perpendicular to that one. So we're proposing, and those fixtures suitably light up that side of the building, and will also provide enough lighting on this side of the new building. We would like to add 3 fixtures with similar type downlights on the back side of this building so that there is lighting there, but no other fixtures on the side.
And those lights will be on the same time as the others are, the existing lights are on, okay.
There's no neighbors abutting back there. There's gravel, yeah.
Keep the sander. Fair.
did they go for site plan review? Okay, so that would be addressing the downlight and all that kind of stuff. Okay, and can I ask you one other question? They're asking for less than the allowed 25% expansion. They don't get another shot at it, right?
They technically could go for that last point. I forget exactly what the precise calculation is. They could go for that very minimal increase in size in the future, but they've essentially used up all of their 25% from the point where this property became a non-conforming use.
Okay.
So, yeah, so they could presumably do that in the future. So in another situation, if someone did a 5% expansion and then came in for the remaining 20%, they could do that.
But it's still 5 or 20 of the original size,
That's
not
correct.
the
When
original
the use
plus the
became
5.
non-conforming, correct.
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you.
Other questions for the applicant? Okay, I'll open the public hearing. Anyone wish to speak in favor of this application? Sir? Please approach the microphone.
We need it for the TV.
You're on television.
Okay. My name is Peter Sullivan, 10 Pine Hill Road, which abuts Pine Hill Storage. I'm just confused about why he needs the zoning was changed recently. Can somebody explain that to me as to how it was changed and why it was changed?
So I believe the zoning change took place before I was here, but sometime around 2010 or so, 2011. So I'm going to be very open here. I believe this was an oversight of the planning board when they went through this zoning change. And why I believe that is because the area directly to the north of this property is the Pine Hill Road Development District. The abutting 4 parcels that you see there are part of the Pine Hill Road Development District. And one of the purpose statements in that district is to promote self-storage facilities and other similar uses. Somehow this property, despite the fact that it's been in existence for 30 or more years, was left out of that zoning change. So as a result, this is in the Bay Street Limited Business District, which does not allow for storage facilities as a permitted use. So I believe it was an oversight of zoning, but unlike cities that can do rezonings very quickly, we cannot adjust that quickly, and therefore they're in front of us for the special exception tonight. So in 2011, it was basically an oversight when the planning board looked at it.
Okay, so does that set a precedent? So if I wanted to sell my property to him, he could build more storage there?
No, he's not in the right zone.
So
If you sold,
I'm in the same neighborhood.
Yep.
Right?
If you sold your property to him, it would not give him the ability to expand further. What I think we really should logically look at is whether or not the zoning should perhaps change in this area. But yeah, unfortunately, by gaining more property, he wouldn't be able to add additional storage.
Okay, so if they approve tonight, that would be the max that it would ever be at any given time? Unless the zoning changes. Okay. As far as my wife and I are concerned, we're in favor of it. We've had no issues with any of the people that have had storage there. There's never been any, there is even a couple of motorcycles that are stored there, and they come, they leave for the day, and they come back. It's not an issue. It's always been maintained well. And if in the process of changing this over, he keeps that like that, we have no issue with that. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Sarah?
I would just state that when we went out to the site plan, the site review, the two lower buildings on that plan there, he spoke about redoing the roof and redoing the outside. So I think that even though it doesn't look shabby now, I think it will only look better.
Close the public hearing. Any discussion amongst ourselves? Shall we go through the criteria?
Yeah, we just skip through that criteria. We start out with,
Site suitability?
start with the special exception criteria A.
Yep.
Site suitability. There is adequate usable space, as shown on the plan. The access is not going to change. The environmental constraints, they are going to move the detention swale, so that seems appropriate. B, the immediate neighborhood impact. I don't see that there's any negative impact by the expansion. The noise level, vibration, dust, it's a hot top, there's no dust or glare. No smoke, fumes, gas, odor, inappropriate hours. The hours aren't going to change. They're consistent with what they have been. C, that there will be no undue nuisance or serious hazard to pedestrian or vehicle traffic. The increase of the one building, which is smaller than the one beside it, should not increase the traffic that much. The location and design and the access way has off-street parking. That's going to stay the same or expand. They're going to expand that somewhat, so that's any availability for that. Public surface and facilities that, they on sewer and water? We're on private septic and public water. Okay, so that's not going to change. The private septic and the public water will not change. The stormwater drainage, they're going to take care of that. Fire protection, police protection is not going to change the need for an increase. There'll be nothing changed to the street. I don't believe there's a park or a school right near there. The appropriateness of the site plan consideration shall include parking scheme, that's on the plan, traffic circulation, that's on the plan, open space, fencing, landscaping. Well, we've got it colored in green, so I guess they're going to take care of that, or it's already there. Signage is not going to change.
The only thing we look with the appropriate at the time, we would like to address the signage there, and something that's not larger in size, not larger in quantity, just a different looking sign.
That will be taken. That will be taken care of. That will be taken care of at the planning board.
That's correct. Okay, so I think there's another process for that. So
That-
we're not
yeah.
asking for any type of relief on signage.
Yeah, because they have to go through site plan. Commercial vehicles, there are no commercial vehicles going in and out of there. And lighting impact, there'll be no lighting impact. They're going to improve the lighting when they also improve the other older buildings.
I have one question on number 4. There's no water to each one of these facilities and no bathrooms out there?
I'm sorry.
Oh.
Let's move to open the public hearing. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Public hearing's reopened, sorry.
Any water facilities in any of these storage units or bathrooms?
No, the only bathroom is in the office building, okay, and that won't change, but there's no water in any of the buildings.
I would just like to bring up when Suzanne referred to number 5, landscaping. When we were out there, there was a tree. It would be to the top of where, thank you, that was there. And I did ask the owner if he was planning on keeping that tree because it is kind of a screening at the edge of his lot. And he said he would try to, or he might relocate it.
We aren't going to make it a condition whether they keep it or relocate it, so that's just a side note.
It's a nice tree, okay, and we
Yeah.
want to keep it, okay.
keep
If
it
we
if
need to relocate it, we
they
relocate
can.
it by only a few feet.
F, immediate neighborhood integrity. This has been an ongoing use, and I don't see that there would be any change to the trend of the neighborhood. Even with the addition, I think that upgrading the other buildings is a plus to the neighborhood. Impact on property values, that the proposed use will not cause or contribute to a decline in property values, again, because they're upgrading the other buildings and enclosing an office area, they're improving the property, so there should be no negative impact. That the proposed use of the structure is consistent with the spirit and Part 1 of the intent of the master plan.
Do you need to close the public hearing?
Any further questions for the applicant? I'll close the public hearing. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'd make a motion.
Please do.
That was me this time.
I'd make a motion to approve, now let me get this right. The plan dated 3/8/2018 for the Pine. What?
March 28th.
2018. What? It's
March 28th.
3/8/2018. It is. Says proposed. Am I on the right one? Proposed?
Yeah, so if you note in the bottom right-hand corner, the revision date is actually I guess it is 3/29. The only reason I'm emphasizing that is because these plans did change.
Yeah, I don't want it to change, not to what we've approved. 3/29, okay. Okay, so start over again. That the criteria for a special exception has been met as we have gone through each one of them for Pine Hill Road Realty Trust LLC, 685 Elm, oh, I'm reading the wrong place. Where's the address?
18 Pine Hill
Oh,
Road.
18 Pine Hill Road, tax map 190-020, Bay Street Limited Business District, for allowing the construction of one additional self-storage building, 35 by 96 feet, to a total of 3,360 square feet, and the expansion of the existing storage office facility by 271 square feet for the enclosure of a portico area for the self-storage kiosks. The total non-conforming use expansion is 3,631 feet. The proposed expansion is compliant with a 25% expansion threshold. And with that, the planner's recommendation of his conditions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion?
I can't hear her.
So we'll add in accordance with the plan as revised through March 29th, 2018.
You said that.
Is there a second?
Yes.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you, gentlemen.
This must be mine, right?
Okay, we have minutes to look at.
But I couldn't imagine what I said. Purple, it must be mine. Oh, wait a minute, this purple, it must be yours.
I don't even know, because
I do too. I do too. Yeah. I like these because I can put them on whatever. You know, on the edge of it. You know, you lose them. All right.
Okay, we're going to review the minutes of the regular meeting of March 5th, 2018.
Can I just, we had this thing about, I just asked you a question. We have this thing,
We'll discuss that after we do the minutes.
because they're not going to reappoint anybody
No.
until the second meeting of April. And I think they have to put somebody in that space for this year. They have, the next, I don't think they have to appoint.
We can appoint somebody this year.
Yes, yeah, so I think we should put on.
Can't see it?
Great, got it.
My dad's colorblind, so I know what you mean.
All right, gentlemen. Okay, page 1 of the minutes. I think we ought to recognize that Mr. Ryder was here at the last meeting. All right, we'll take up a no.
We'll send him a box of Girl Scout cookies.
He did a good job. 2 words this way.
We'll have to come up with a third one for next time. Anything else on page 1?
Did you have something, Susan?
no, I'm sorry.
Page 2.
I have a question, and I don't know if it's something we can address now or later on, but on the first page, when you go to the 3rd paragraph at the bottom,
Page 1.
First page?
page 1, page 1. Susan, she reads the abutters information, and she reads the public notification, and states that there was a site visit, all well and good. But the next part, it doesn't attribute to who said that. And basically what I think it is it's typed in there that this is the planner's review. These are, the town planner states the following. I think that's, you don't state it, you don't sometimes get up and read it, but you have it in your memorandum. And so I think it looks like Susan is reading it and saying it when in fact she isn't. I think it needs a little heading.
So you mean where it says the applicant has requested a variance for all setbacks?
Yeah, that whole thing, those are your planner review remarks.
That's a summary of the application.
It'd be nice to clarify that that's the planner's review comments as follows.
Or create a format that
A
says,
memorandum or something such as that.
Staff review. Sometimes the planner gets up and actually reads his memo and review, and sometimes not. But in this case, you didn't, but I think it should be said, the following planners, the memo as outlined by the planner.
or you could put a heading in, summary of
Just a
application.
little heading. Yeah. And alls I had on page 2, is it okay to go to page 2?
Yes, page 2. Anything more on page 1? For the 3rd time. Page 2.
Yeah, the last paragraph, it says, Alan Frederickson, 50 Martin Hill Road, stated he before also. It was he that stated that.
In the 2nd paragraph, then, I think this needs to be attributed to somebody because it's unclear what the proposed lot coverage is.
Paragraph
Sorry,
2.
paragraph, this first full paragraph, it is unclear what the proposed lot coverage is.
because there was no survey.
Okay. All right, then in the, just beyond the middle, Matt Sullivan, the second line, further, it was explained. Anything more on page 2? Page 3.
Page 3, I've got one on the 1, 2, 3, 4th one down.
Okay.
Starts with Matt Sullivan. Matt Sullivan responded, this is a request for setback.
Okay.
Just a nice little touch.
And I think the last phrase should be, should this application be approved, the approval should include a requirement for an as-built survey.
The one before that, the Matt Sullivan paragraph.
Same paragraph. Between the words "the" and "requirement," the approval should include a requirement for an as-built survey. And then the next to the last on that one, I closed with a D.
And I thought, right after Ken Perry talked, I know I had a discussion or pointed out the fact that, I guess I asked Matt first if this was a deeded lot, and because I remember I commented on the fact that it was not deeded as an unbuildable lot. And I think that's how we came up with Matt Sullivan comment, with appropriate relief and permits, most lots can be made buildable. Right before Fred closed the public hearing. Well, I think it's just important that it's clarified that the deed does not, I asked the question, did the deed reflect that it was an unbuildable lot because of the size? And the answer was no. There was nothing in the deed that restricted it just to the telephone company for that use. Because we had that discussion about a deed restriction on it, and there was none. And that was when you said it was, almost any lot can be buildable.
Where is she?
That's
Right there,
right here.
where it says, 3 lines up from the motion, where it says, Matt Sullivan commented the appropriate relief and permits, most lots can be buildable.
I don't even know if I
So
should
did me
say
say
this.
Matt Sullivan noted that the deed did not include a restriction?
Yeah, or just that I asked, was there a deed restriction
Sarah,
for the telephone company's use only?
it's good, okay.
Yeah.
Anything else on page 3?
Well, I'm not going to make any amendment, but because of that discussion about whether it was a buildable lot or not, I could see the road we were going down. And then when you said, well, you know, most lots can be built upon, you know, I was getting a little nervous. So the reason I suggested to the board that they deny it without prejudice is because I was afraid that this was going to end up in some sort of litigation, and that left the door open for them to come back and not say, well, you said it wasn't a buildable lot. Because if we had denied it with prejudice, they could have assumed that we would deny it because it couldn't be built upon. I didn't want to go down that road.
This board should never say that, in my opinion, should never say that a lot is not buildable as
Right.
justification for denial of variance. And that's sort of what I was getting at in my discussion.
Yeah, well, that opened the door for my wheels to start turning, and I said, oh, no, this guy was not too happy about all this, and we're going to end up in a mess.
I can tell you that, and this, I may be criticized for this, but when I meet with people about property, I never tell them that a lot is not buildable, because that is simply just
With enough money, anything can be built on. Except in the middle of Lake Winnipesaukee. But I was just, because you, I think, asked about whether it was gonna be with or without prejudice. And that's why I was suggesting to the board, make it without prejudice, because that way they couldn't come back on us.
Yeah, well, see, they messed up when they first subdivided out with the intent to use it just for the telephone company. They didn't put that restriction on it. So now we have this weeny little lot.
Anyway,
That's not good.
Anything more on page 3? Page 4.
Fourth paragraph down, Randy Walker. It says Randy walked on the fourth paragraph.
Yeah.
Yeah, should be Randy Walker.
And then there should, he did
Oh,
walk.
he did.
He probably did walk here.
He did. That's a good catch.
Addressed the board and reviewed the application.
and the same thing on the applicant proposes the construction of a deck and existing, that's the whole thing from the planner's review memorandum. And the same thing, the public hearing for the variance, that was from the legal public notice. It isn't like somebody's saying it. Most of the minutes are transcribed because somebody says something.
I think the second, paragraph where Randy is walking, is a walker, not a walked. Sorry. The last sentence, as part of this application, the decks are being taken down. And I think the point that was made is that it's irrelevant whether they had a permit or not. So maybe we want to say, and therefore, whether they existed without permits is not relevant, instead of saying will have no impact.
Say that again, and therefore?
And therefore, whether they existed without permits is not relevant.
Because you're eliminating a pre-existing nonconformity.
Anything more on page 4?
Nope.
Page 5. Nothing on page 5. Page 6.
Nick, can we do the same thing with those two top paragraphs? The first one being the public notice, legal public notice is as follows, and then the planner's review is as follows.
Okay. In
And the last, on page 6, the last line, before consideration of minutes, that one-liner, even though she probably said it, it doesn't make sense. Heidi stated she is withdrawing the application. It should be period. She doesn't get to do with or without prejudice. Just strike it.
Good point.
And then the sentence that Matt Sullivan noted, the word antiques on the side of the barn would not be taken into consideration as a sign for that business. Isn't that counter to what we discussed tonight?
It is, but it's part of the record. It should be in there.
Is that what you said?
The wood,
Okay.
He was overruled by the good job that our code enforcement officer is doing, even though we don't pay him to come.
the wood should be maybe changed to should. On the side of the barn, should not be. I mean, it's a recommendation,
Yeah.
not a blanket, that we wouldn't do it, because guess what, we did.
No matter, he says he said it, so it's okay.
Well, change the would to should. It's a little
Can we do that?
softer.
Because that's what
Okay.
he said.
You would have said would, not should.
Doesn't bother me, one way or the other.
Can we just go back to the withdrawal piece? So what are we doing when the state chief is withdrawing the application without prejudice?
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. She didn't do it without prejudice.
That's true. The only issue with that, though, is that we're
Was that verbatim then?
Yeah.
That's what she said, I guess.
Okay.
And we don't,
The tape would back it up.
No big deal.
I had one other thought in the third paragraph down. Matt Sullivan explained that in the GR district, one sign is permitted of business. The variance is for the dimension being proposed and for the additional sign, that is for 36 square foot.
Well, I thought each one of the additional signs was going to be 36 square feet, not just one.
But she only proposed,
Each sign was 12 square feet.
Oh, yes, you're right, I'm sorry.
So the total sign size is for 36.
So you want to put total in between additional and sign?
that's fine. I just say and the additional sign. Because what you're looking for, the variance is for the dimension being proposed and for the additional sign. I think, right? Or is it the dimension, is it just the dimension being proposed? She has to get the variance for the sign and for the size of it.
She was so unsure of what she was looking for that day, so.
So reread the tape and let us know what you said. Okay. Okay. I think that's it. The rest of it are,
I'm no longer Father Time.
that's right.
Or Tim, actually.
Right.
Okay, can I have a motion to approve the minutes as corrected?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Meeting's adjourned.
I'm Fred, I'm abstaining.
Suzanne, please let the record reflect that Suzanne's abstaining.